Hey, Chris, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jay. It's a pleasure.
So I'm really excited to talk about what we are going to talk about today. And this is going to be a little bit more of a tactical show for people that are listening or watching than maybe some of our episodes in the past. A lot of times we talk about the entrepreneurial journey. We can talk about that a little bit with you too, for sure, so people know that you have authority to help them. But what I really want to talk about today is something that I can tell you for sure that 5 or 10 years ago, I would not have been excited to talk about. The idea of dealing with systems and processes and agendas and procedures, like that kind of stuff makes me just want to go curl up in a ball and die. But what we're going to talk about is a system that has revolutionized our business, and you're an expert at it, so I can't wait to talk about it. Tell us a little bit about kind of who you are and what you do first, and then we'll get into those, tactics of what we're going to talk about today.
Sure. So I started my first entrepreneurial business when I was 18 years old, and ran that for a couple of years. Ultimately sold that and started another firm, a graphic manufacturing firm, with my brother Jason in 2004 out of the front room of my house. Spent about 10 years running that business, and ultimately got to a point where a lot of entrepreneurs get, right? You're working 80 hours a week, you're frustrated, you're not getting the results you want, and you're just kind of stuck, right? We call it hitting the ceiling. And I'm like a lot of entrepreneurs. I read different books. I'm a visionary type, so much like you, Jay, we kind of got like a million ideas on how to fix things, right? But we're really bad at the systems, like you mentioned. So I was on a business trip. I ended up reading the book Traction, and I fell in love with it. I was like, oh my God, this is awesome, because it's simple and it really spoke to me as a visionary. I gave it to my brother, and he goes, great, another freaking book. And I'm like, yeah. But he kind of read it. He goes, this is actually pretty good. This might work. So we ended up getting hooked up with a local implementer, and hired him about 5.5 years ago. And that started my EOS journey. And over the next 5.5 years, what happened was we put systems in place, like you mentioned, agendas and all that fun stuff that us entrepreneurs really love. But what it did was it systemized our business and allowed us to put in accountability and discipline so that I could elevate above the business and really focus on the parts I love. And that's the leadership and the vision part of it. So fast forward a couple of years, and this was 2 years ago, I started talking to my implementer about how I could help other entrepreneurs, because I gave out probably 50 traction books to all my friends and colleagues. So I was like, hey guys, you're stuck too, right? Try this, read this book. And I said, hey, how can I become an implementer? And he said, well, I'm starting a firm, and I joined his firm. So for the past little over a year now, I've been an EOS implementer, professional EOS implementer with the Traction Hub. And I've helped many more entrepreneurs kind of get more what they want out of their business. So.
Awesome. I love it. So there's probably, of all the books that I mentioned, which are a lot, which is ironic. I was telling you earlier pre-show, I don't read very well. I'm a very slow reader, but I realized a long time ago that I could do audiobooks. And so I do a lot of audiobooks. And then if I love it, I'll get the audio and then also buy the physical copy, and I'll listen to the audio while reading the physical copy. And that helps me kind of retain that info if it's really something important. Traction is one of those books. So if I were to pick the top 5, I always feel like picking the best is always the hardest, but if I had to pick the top 5 most transformational books for my business growth, and really not just my personal growth, but the company itself, Traction is definitely in that top 5. It has been revolutionary for me. My Traction journey, and for everybody that's listening doesn't know what book we're talking about, the book's title is Traction. It's on the shelf there behind Chris. It's by a guy named Gino Wickman. Neither Chris or I wrote that book. Unfortunately, we'd both be a lot richer if we did. But that book, I was at a leadership event quite a few years ago, and it was a bunch of other marketing agency, design agency, development agency owners at this event. Love that event. And by a group called the Bureau of Digital. And so when I was there, I was talking about some of the things I was dealing with, things I was struggling with, and I must have had 3 separate business owners say, oh, you got to read Traction. And it wasn't the same conversation. It was like, oh, you got to retract. It was like, here's the solution to all of the problems that you are talking about. And ultimately, for me, I think these problems are things that probably stem for a lot of entrepreneurs. It's that a lot of us started a business because we were good at a particular thing, right? We knew how to do something, and then we realized by doing that thing, somebody else would be helped, and as a result of them being helped, they would also pay us for it. And like, wow, this is actually maybe a job. But a job isn't a business, and Traction really helped me kind of make that transition. So what are some of those kind of primary struggles that you see other entrepreneurs and business owners having that when you hear them, you go, okay, this Traction is a good solution for this person? What are those red flags that you hear?
Oh God, there's a million of them, right? Because as business owners, we're constantly juggling the million different things we get faced with every day, whether it's somebody calling in sick or somebody not doing their job like you'd want them to, or the system being broken. There's a million things that we struggle with every day. And a lot, like you said, the reason I think EOS, which is the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which is the system that's written about in Traction, I think the reason it works is because it's simple. So it's built on the belief and the finding that all of those things that go wrong in our daily business, the million different problems, are really rooted in 6 key components. And if you can just focus on those 6 key components, focus on the important rather than the urgent, the stuff that's distracting us every day, a lot of that stuff will just take care of itself and go away. So most entrepreneurs, like you mentioned, we kind of started this business because we did something, we're good at it, right? And then we grew to a point where we had to become a manager. We had to hire somebody. There's not really a school that says, here's how you manage somebody. Here's how you create the systems and grow your business and scale it. And then, oh, what do you know? We got busier again and we had to hire somebody else. So now the person we hired has to become a manager. We now have to become a leader. That's even another layer of complexity, and we have to focus on how do we simplify that, and how do we get more of what we want. So.
Yeah, a couple of key things that you were talking about there that I think are really important for people to think about, and I'd love for us to kind of dissect them a little bit more. The first one was you talked about the difference between focusing on things that are important versus just things that are urgent. Talk a little bit more about what you mean by that, because I think some people may not really understand the distinction and kind of why that matters.
Sure. So most businesses are started by visionary type people, right? We have a million ideas. We're shot out of a cannon. Those million ideas, 3 of them are probably good. The rest of them are horrible and are going to lead us to ruin. But if we can focus on those 3 and not cause what we call organizational whiplash, because we're constantly changing the direction of the organization, we're getting distracted. Focus on the important, we're going to get to our goals. I've talked to so many entrepreneurs that have these long-term goals. I want to be a $100 million company in 10 years. Well, that's great. But if you don't start working on it now and you wait till 9 years from now, you're never going to get there. So when I talk about focusing on the important, if you're not setting goals for this quarter, for this year, and hitting those goals that are going to lead you to that 10-year goal, you're never going to reach those. Within EOS, we compartmentalize everything. Okay, we break it down on the Vision Traction Organizer. It's a 2-page document, business plan essentially, that answers all these questions. But the thing that I really like about it is it calls out rocks. Okay, rocks are a term coined by Stephen Covey. Really boils down to what is the 90-day priority that I've got to hit this quarter. And the way I like to teach it is, we'll take our clients through a discovery process where they say, okay, you have a 10-year goal, great. That's where we're going for 10 years. Where are we going to be in 3? What's our 3-year picture? Okay, we dial that in and say, okay, if that's true in 3 years, now what do we need to do for 1 year out? What's our 1-year plan look like? What's the revenue goal? What's the profit goal? What are the tangible deliverables at the end of that year? And then we break it down into, okay, great, we got 3 quarters left until then. What has to happen this quarter? What are those rocks that have to get done that are more important than anything else so that we hit that 1-year goal?
Yeah, that stuff is so good. I mean, I know that some of these things, when people hear them, it's like, okay, well, yeah, I need a 10-year plan and then like a 3-year picture and then 1-year goals and maybe 90-day rocks or goals, whatever people want to call them, key objectives. But the fact is that most businesses are not really doing this stuff consistently. And so what I found is that over time, I'd kind of winged some of these things together with like hodgepodge from 10 different, systems. And even the tendency, I've seen a lot of people do this, and I think I kind of did this at the beginning, was you get the traction book, you read it, and you think, oh, well, we can just do this. And you start just trying to do it. And then you think, well, we don't really like how this is done, so we're going to do this thing over here instead. And then people tend to kind of fall off the track as a result of that. Talk about like, what's the difference between somebody kind of self-implementing, in other words, reading the book and just kind of trying to follow the system, because it's all in the book, or bringing in an implementer, which is somebody basically an outside consultant or advisor to help them, get through that process. What is the advantage of doing that versus trying to do it yourself?
Sure. So like you said, everything's in the book. And if I encourage everybody to go buy the book, if you would like a free copy, I'm happy to send you one. Just drop me a note in the comments and I will respond there. But all of the information is in the book, like you said. So there's no need necessarily to hire an implementer to do this. You can do it on your own. The fact is, though, that like I said, you get a million things thrown on your plate every day. Susie calls in sick, and Joe smashed his thumb with a hammer out on the job site, and you got to deal with a workers' comp claim. There's a million things we've got going on every day. What the implementer does is we bring accountability to the table. So I'll tell you a little story about this in just a second. But so as an implementer, what we do is we meet 3 times over the first 60 days through Focus Day, Vision Building Day 1, and Vision Building Day 2. So by the end of 60 days, we've got all the foundational tools covered. We've got all the questions on the Vision Traction Organizer answered. Your leadership team is one cohesive unit working together as a functional team. And now you're ready to roll this out to the group, right? To the rest of your team. What I'm finding is that when people are self-implementing, it takes them a year, 2, 3, 4 years, if they ever get to that point where they're actually rolling it out as a system to their team. So without that accountability that the implementer brings, it just takes a lot longer to get there. We were, like I said, we engaged with an implementer right off the bat, and we went through about a year and a half, and we kept having some of the same issues pop up. And Michael, my implementer, he said, guys, we have the same problem. We've had the same problem since we started. We got to call a spade. And we're sitting there in a leadership team quarterly, and he looks at me and goes, Chris, he goes, we all know what the problem is. One of your leadership team members isn't in the right seat, or they're not a right person. We call it right person, right seat. He said, this guy's a problem. And if we don't address this problem, we're not going to win. Yeah. And Michael said, Chris, I want to be part of winning teams, and I want you guys to win. And I'm worried that we're not going to be able to win if we don't address the issues and get real about our problems, right? So he says, we need to solve this problem, or I don't want to be your implementer anymore. Let's talk about accountability, right? Right. Yeah. So that, I think, is where the key. We ultimately solved the problem. It took about 2 months for that to rectify itself, and we've now just hit the accelerator pedal since that issue. But the point is that accountability, the willingness to enter the danger, right? How many consultants, because we hate the term consultants. I don't think we're consultants, we are implementers. But most consultants don't want to lose their job, right? But if you can't ask the hard questions and go straight to the root cause and really get uncomfortable sometimes, you're going to be faced with those issues time and time and time again, because you're going to get what you tolerate. And if you're tolerating low performance, lack of accountability, you're just going to get more and more of it. So.
And it's interesting. One of the things that we had an implementer at the beginning that helped us kind of get things going for the first year, which was huge. And one of the things he said to us in the process was, part of my job is to help you get to the last 10% of the truth. And I was kind of like, and I've said that 100 times now, and we'll say it now in our leadership team. It's like, all right, well, what's the last 10% of the truth here? Because even in those tight groups, where you've known people for a long time and everybody seems to be fighting for the same team, we all inevitably will hold back a certain amount of information because we're worried what the outcome's going to be. If I say this out loud of what I'm thinking, what is the repercussion of that? Because words matter and words have consequences. And so we start to worry about that. But I think in those leadership meetings especially, there has to be just a full level of truth and accountability. And I think especially for people that are, have been leaders themselves their whole lives, and maybe leaders even the wrong word. When somebody's been in charge of a business their whole lives, when they've been the owner, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Many times we don't have people who hold us accountable. Most small businesses are not big enough to have a board of directors or a board of advisors or anything like that. And so, for years and years and years, I had nobody who held me accountable because nobody really knew. I was the one who knew all the things, and people knew what I told them and what I chose to tell them, and that was it. And so one of the hardest parts for me with traction, and I'd love to talk about this a little bit because I think a lot of people may struggle with this once they get into it, especially smaller businesses that, they maybe don't already have a defined leadership team. This was a tricky thing for me because I had, when you go through traction, one of the things that has you do is start a leadership team meeting. Well, I didn't have a leadership team. And so I started to put one together. And one of the big mistakes I made along the way, and I've told the guys this, is I didn't really prepare them for what that meant. Because leadership is not just about power. Matter of fact, it's very little about power. It's much more about responsibility, right? It's much more about, I believe that leaders don't gain rights as a leader. They actually give them up. And I didn't prepare my leadership team for that reality. They were no longer just one of the team. They were elevated by title and by the fact that they got to show up with me in a leadership team meeting that the rest of the team didn't. I didn't prepare them for that. And that was a huge mistake on my part. And that may be because I didn't keep that implementer long enough. That's possible as well. So maybe that was my own fault. But I'm curious from your perspective, what have you seen when people start to figure out who is that leadership team and what things do I need to be aware of before I start developing that? When they get to that roadblock in the book, well, what's some counsel you might give them?
Yes, I can speak on this personally because we didn't have a leadership team either. We had about 50, 55 people working for us at the time, but it was myself and my brother at the top of the organization, and everybody else reported to both of us, right? It was just a mess.
Wow. That's
hard. When we started it was, I don't know how we even grew to that point, but we started putting together the leadership team, right? Because we looked around and said, okay, there's some people here who are doing more than the other people. There's some people here who have some potential. Up to that point, we kind of said, okay, well, if you were a good graphic installer, right? We're in the graphic manufacturing business. We had graphics installers. Well, if you were a good graphics installer, well, that's going to make you a great graphics installer manager, right?
It seems right, but it doesn't work that way.
You would think, but it doesn't work that way. And we caused ourselves a lot of pain and heartache because we were elevating people who weren't managers. They weren't leaders. And it's interesting you talk about that, being in charge of a business versus leading a business, because there's a big difference between leading people, managing people, and just being a boss, right?
Yeah.
The boss, you probably all have seen the memes where the boss is the guy sitting on the box and the people are pulling it. He's got the whip back there, right? Cracking the whip.
Yeah.
And the leader's at the front actually pulling with the rest of the team. That's kind of what it really boils down to. But leadership is all about making sure you're empowering your team, right? It's not about being what we call a genius with 1,000 helpers, because that's how most small businesses are structured. They've got a leader, a boss, somebody who's started the business, the founder, and everybody looks to them for all of the answers. And if you're the answer man, the answer woman, you can only do so much, and you can't scale until you can start delegating some of that stuff out. Delegation is a really, really hard thing for me personally, just because I think I say things and I think I'm communicating clearly, but I'm not, right? So when I say, hey, go and do this task, well, I forgot to tell them when it was supposed to be done. I forgot to tell them the 3 different, checkpoints they had to hit on the way, and I forgot to give them the budget they were working within. And then when they are late, they're over budget, and they didn't do the 3 things I needed done, I get mad at them. Really, that's my fault for not clearly communicating what I was looking for.
Yeah. So
it's all about delegation and how can you lead your team through proper expectations and creating those expectations into agreements so that they actually know what to do and they're willing to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting as you were talking about, I had kind of this picture in my head. I had an old pastor who used to always say that people tend to fall off the side of one cliff or the other. And what I thought about, which I've never really put it in this context before, is that on one side of the cliff is this like aggressive boss that nobody really wants to work for, but he gets things done, or she gets things done, but they're just not an ideal person. And then there's this person over here, who just wants to be everybody's friend. And they actually really care about people deeply, and people know that they care about them deeply. But the big mistake that they make is that they're not clear enough on how to get things done, like what you were just saying a minute ago. And the leader, I think, is somewhere in the middle of that. You know, they care enough about people, but they don't need to be their best friend, because that's not their job. And they are clear enough with people, but they don't want to be this like, you know, aggressive boss that everybody despises, because enough people have those. People need leaders, and the leader is somewhere in between. I like how Kim Scott puts this in Radical Candor. She kind of talks about the idea of ruinously empathetic versus obnoxiously aggressive. And I think most people who are leader type people who think they should be in leadership, fall off of one of those two cliffs. And I think in my life, I've probably fallen off both of them at some point, different point. So it's super interesting to me. A little bit earlier, you had talked about this idea of visionary. So what I want to do is help people think about their organization, and we won't have time to dissect all this because we don't have a 2-day onboarding here with them. But I want people to start thinking about like what these higher levels of the organization are and really where their role might be, because I do think that some people land in different roles. So you'd mentioned the idea earlier that you're a visionary. That's a term used a lot in traction. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about those top two roles that are kind of at the top of that accountability chart in traction, and what the differences between those two roles are, so people can kind of get some context for that.
Yeah, so visionaries, we're a unique set, right? We're cut from this different cloth. We have a lot of ideas. We're very high energy. We bring a lot to the table as far as like R&D, and we like to manage big relationships. Those are the types of things that we see typically on the visionary accountability chart. The main two being big ideas, relationships, and managing the culture. Right? They want to make sure they've got the the quote unquote vibe of the group, and make sure it's what you want and why you actually started the business in the first place. Visionaries are typically one of the founders. But yeah, that's the visionary. And the problem with the visionaries is notice I didn't mention anything about accountability in there, right? Because we're not real good at accountability. We don't like having those important and difficult conversations that ultimately what creates the accountability that we have within our organization. Without accountability, you're not going to get anywhere. So visionaries tend to lean towards that cliff you talked about on the ruinous empathy side, because we're typically, extroverts. We like to be engaging with people. We like to be liked. And that's
the thing right there. It's like we want to be liked, and that is dangerous.
Right. 100%. And we're afraid that people aren't going to like us if we hold them accountable. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true. People crave accountability. Most people want to succeed. They want to know when they go home for the day that they did good and that they won the game, right? The game of business. And if we can create the right rules and context so that they know the game they're playing, they know the score, they know how to score, they know what they're supposed to do, what you expect out of them, you can create a path where they're going to thrive. They're going to be happy with themselves, which also makes them happy with you. I've said many times that if you take the employee and you put them in one room, and you take the manager and you put them in the other room and ask them both what the employee's job is, you will often get two different answers. And that's just a recipe for disaster, because we're lacking clarity with what we expect out of our team. So how can they possibly win?
Yeah, that's such a big deal. As you were talking about that, the idea that we don't like accountability, I don't want to over spiritualize anything, but it's interesting to me. I was thinking about Jesus, and in the Bible, one of the things that Jesus was always very good at is that the first thing he did was he built relationship. And the second thing he did was hold people accountable. And you see this in many stories, but like there's this famous story of him walking down the street, and there's this guy in a tree. His name's Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus was a tax collector, which nobody liked in that world. I mean, tax collectors were actually horrible people. They really were thieves, and really like hated by society. And Jesus looked up and said, "Hey, Zacchaeus, I'm going to your house. We're going to go have some dinner." That's basically what he said. And there's a little Sunday school song that goes along with that. That's right. Come out of that tree. I'm going to your house today. Yep. And what's interesting about that, he didn't look at Zacchaeus and say, "Hey, Zacchaeus, stop being a thief. What you're doing is wrong." What he did and said was, "Hey, let's go get something to eat." And then he said, "Stop being a thief. What you're doing is wrong." Actually, Zacchaeus just realized that himself ultimately and turned from his ways, right? And so I think it's so interesting because, I mean, shoot, most of us aren't a whole lot different than Zacchaeus. I know I'm probably a lot closer to Zacchaeus than I am to Jesus. But I think about this from a leadership perspective, and I think about the visionary, and I think, wow, the visionary's really desire is to build those relationships. That is kind of their root, what they're good at or should be good at ultimately. If you're really not good at those things, you might not be a visionary. And the integrate on the other side, not that they're not good at relationships, they need to be good at relationships too. We all do if we have if we're in a leadership role. But they're better at the details, the accountability, and the system. So talk about that integrator role a little bit and what that looks like in most organizations that are successful.
Yeah, so the integrator is that other puzzle piece, right? If we imagine the visionary looks like a puzzle, the piece that's shaped this way, and when you find the right integrator and they fit together perfect, okay? We're not talking about just a fit from an accountability standpoint, but we're talking about a personal relationship as well. So it's a little bit different when we talk about a visionary integrator relationship. Mark C. Winters wrote a great book called Rocket Fuel that goes really, really deep into the visionary integrator relationship. And I strongly suggest reading that if you think you are a visionary or an integrator. But the integrator, what they bring to the table is all those missing pieces that the visionary isn't good at, right? We have a tool in EOS called the Delegate and Elevate tool, right? We have a 4 quadrants, and you write things you love and you're great at, you like and you're good at, you like but you're not good at, and you don't like and you're not good at, right? And we want to delegate the stuff off the bottom quadrants and give them to somebody else. So if I did this exercise as a visionary, I've got accountability, I've got follow-up, I've got scorecard metrics, I've got all this type of stuff on the bottom. I need to get that off of my plate and onto somebody else's. And that's where the integrator comes in. The integrator, they typically like the day-to-day minutia of running the business. They like schedules, and they love agendas, and they love asking questions. My integrator at AZ Pro, I still own and operate my graphic firm, right? And I'm the visionary, and I have an integrator there. And we were talking about a difficult conversation we've got with one of our team members. And one of the things that was said was, I just asked a couple questions in an email, and my integrator replied, and he goes, "Yeah, whenever I don't understand or the answers aren't quite making sense, I ask more questions." And I said, "I love that approach. It's much better than my approach of assuming all the answers."
Right? That's right. I'll just tell you what to do. It's obvious. I can just do the thing that I'm thinking. That's the first thing that came to my mind. It has to be the best thing.
And you couldn't have asked for a better definition of the difference between a visionary and an integrator, right? We know the answers, and we're just going. And meanwhile, he's going, "Wait, slow down. What's wrong here?" And asking a million questions, seeking to understand so that he can make a better decision with all the data. So
yeah, I love this. I love this stuff. Absolutely, I love this stuff as it relates to personality profiles as well. And I know there's a lot of them out there, but there's our 2 favorites here at Design Extensions are the DISC profile and the Enneagram. Mm-hmm. And the DISC is probably the greatest example here as it relates to integrator versus visionary. And on the DISC, for people that aren't familiar with it, there's basically 4 primary personality types. It's the DISC, and the D is typically a more dominant, driving personality. And I always say I'm a very high D, and so if you were to say to me, "Hey Jay, let's go build a bridge," I'd be like, "Great, let's go build a bridge," and I'm ready to start building it. I don't know what we're building it out of or how long it needs to be or anything else. And if you ask a high C who is more likely to be an integrator type, now that's not always true, it's not a litmus test, but they're more likely to be that. They go, "Well, hold on, how long is it? And what kind of material do we make it out of? And how much weight does it need to support? And when do we need to have it done by? And who does it need to be approved by? And, they're going to ask all these questions. I'm over here going like, oh my gosh, let's just build the bridge. And yet, if you can find the right combination of those two people, you actually have extreme magic on your hands. So my wife and I at home are actually the personification of this. I'm a high D. I'm like, let's just do the thing. I don't really care. We'll figure it out as we go. And she's like, hold on. Let's make sure we have a plan. Let's make sure things are put in order. And those two people, to me, are either highly volatile because they hate each other because they're so in contrast, or rocket fuel's a great example, or they can rocket an organization or a family or a group forward because they know how to leverage their strengths.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because the principles we're talking about here don't just apply in business, right? It's a personal relationship thing, and it works at home, it works with friendships, it works in every aspect of life. And it's like you said, you've got two cliffs, and the magic is in the middle. It's the balancing of where we need to go. And like you said, the visionary integrator can oftentimes hate each other because they are so different. And that all comes down to getting on the same page with goals and where we're going and why we're going there, right? Simon Sinek says they don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Yeah. And that is key, to get on the same page with the two people so that they understand why we're doing things and where we're going. But this is interesting too, you mentioned the personality test, because Enneagram or DISC or Myers-Briggs, whichever you're using, it gives you insight into the other person, and you can start to understand the psyche. So when I say something, my integrator understands that it's not me being a jerk. It's really just how I'm wired. And if we start to understand that, it gives us that insight and ability to have that conversation on a different level that maybe we weren't able to previously.
Yeah, it's interesting. I am so passionate about that stuff that we're going to start doing some more coaching work here at Design Extensions, starting actually next month in October. We're kind of launching some new programs, and one of them is personality training. So one of my team members actually got certified in the DISC personality profile, and we're doing some workshops around that. And what I've had some people say to me is, well, you're a marketing agency. Why are you doing personality tests? And what I say to them is, well, our mission of what we do, why we do it, is to help other people grow their businesses. That's our mission. Now, the tools and strategies and techniques of how we make that happen might have been 20 years ago, let's just build a basic website. And then over time, it has been, now let's tie in a marketing campaign and do a video and work on your messaging. But ultimately, what I've found is that the root problems often are lower than what is their marketing and messaging. That's a problem often, but the root problem is often below that. It's the people, it's the process, it's the systems. And so we're going to start doing some of those types of coaching, like DISC personality profiles, because I've seen the impact it can have on teams. And Traction, to me, has just been revolutionary for us. Like clockwork, every Thursday, from 1 to 2:30, we have a leadership team meeting that follows the exact same agenda. And we never used to do that. And I used to think, I don't need an hour and a half every week just to review our...
A waste of time, right?
It's a waste of time. I hate meetings. Meetings are the worst. But I'll tell you, that's one of the most valuable 90 minutes that we have ever. And over the course of, the last couple of years that we've been using Traction, there's just very few surprises. That's the beauty of it. We know the issues when they come up. We know them. We know what we're going to do about them. We know we've developed a scorecard that shows visibility into the future. I was having a meeting with our accountant the other day. He's like, well, talking about last month, he's like, well, this, and this, and some concerns, which I was like, yeah, that's not very good. #COVID. But I said, I'm not worried about that, because here's what my scorecard looks like. Because my scorecard is predictive of the future. I literally have an Excel document that predicts the future of what my business numbers and growth is going to look like. I know what it's going to look like. I knew last month was going to be bad a month and a half before that. I'm not, a month later, I'm not surprised by what happened last month, because I knew that a month and a half before it even happened. And that's what Traction has done for us, has created that system where I go, I'm not surprised anymore. It doesn't mean bad things don't happen. I mean, gosh, business is hard work, but it's been huge for us. What else? I've talked so much today because I'm so passionate about this. I feel like I've hijacked your interview, so I'm sorry for that.
It's all good, man.
It's a work in progress for me. So what have we not talked about as it relates to traction or business growth or business stability or building a business that lasts that you think, you know what, I really want to get to that? Is there something specific about it that you feel like is kind of nagging on you?
You know, there's basically two things that people struggle with when we say, hey, what's your biggest problem you've got? They say people or process. Those are like the two biggest areas where people are missing. People, in EOS, we talk about people from the right person in the right seat context, right? Right people means it's finding somebody who fits your core values, right? We've all made the hire of that hot new salesperson that's, got a great book of business and is going to come in and just blow the doors off, right? And they come in and everybody hates them because they don't align, or they're not doing things with the same level of character that you expect out of your team. They might be doing some unscrupulous things to get some deals closed, or it just doesn't feel right. It's icky. So we talk about right people, and that's all about hiring people who fit your core values. Right seats comes down to clearly articulating what the seat is responsible for, what they're being measured on, what you want that person to be passionate about or obsessing over. You can create a lot of clarity surrounding that. We do that on the accountability chart. And now you've got the context to have a conversation with somebody about accountability. It's real easy to hold somebody accountable for missing a number, right? Hey, Jay, you were supposed to sell 10 websites last month and you only sold 3. What's going on? Those are easy conversations and most people can have those. It's a little bit different when it comes to some of the behavioral stuff, some of the more ambiguous, softer side of misalignment. So the people analyzer, which lines out the core values and the GWC of the seat, do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to do the seat? But specifically those core values, it allows you to have a much more quantifiable conversation with somebody about, hey, you're not quite in alignment on this one. One of our core values might be do the right thing, right? And I saw you last week and you didn't do the right thing in that instance. I would have liked to see you handle that differently. And you can have that conversation openly and honestly. And it, just like I said, it creates that quantifiable context that you can have that conversation around. That's great. The second piece is that process, right? Because like I said, most businesses are started by visionaries. We hate process. So we're not going to create process because that means we might have to follow some of it, right? We like to get out there and wing it. But as you start to scale things, as you get away from the tribal knowledge that we used to start the organization, and you say, okay, now I have to have Joe do this, now I have to have Susie do that. If you don't have the right process in place for them, they're going to struggle. They're not going to have your knowledge, your experience, your relationships, all that stuff to rely on. So we take an 80-20 entrepreneurial approach to that process because we don't want to create a 600-page SOP manual that nobody's ever going to read, right? It doesn't make any sense. What we do is we capture the 20% of what we do regularly that gets us 80% of the way there from a high level, document that, and get it followed by everybody. Those two components, the people component and the process component, now come together because we've only got 80% of what we have documented, right? But we have right people on our team that fit our core values, understand the why of why we do it, and they understand what it means to be in that seat, what they're responsible for, so they can humanize the other 20%, that other gap, and it lets them make their decisions because you've got good people on your team that understand why and where we're going. So they would make those decisions much more in line with how you would.
Yeah, I love that stuff. The whole process side was really hard for me because just documenting things and getting them out of my own head was really hard. But now that we've started to do those things, it's created freedom. Because I think people start businesses for a lot of reasons. They want to do work that they're passionate about, that gives them purpose. They want to make more money, and they want freedom. Like I think those are the 3 primary reasons that people start a business: purpose, freedom, and money. And for me, I had the purpose to some extent, and I had the money, I suppose. And yet I didn't have freedom because I was tied to the business so much. But over time, as we've worked on this, to give people an idea of how big of an impact this stuff can create, this summer I took 30 days off. I took a whole month off. And I was in an RV with my family. We traveled around the whole country. the first 2 weeks, I did absolutely nothing related to business. I did not check a text message, a voicemail, a phone call, an email, nothing. And the last 2 weeks, I checked a couple of emails, but in hindsight, I didn't even really need to do that. It was perfectly fine. And so my vision for our company, it used to be that it would survive without me. If I get hit by a bus, I actually got to talk to Simon Sinek one day, and he kind of said that to me. He's like, well, the litmus test of success in your business is if you get hit by a bus, what happens to the company? How long does it last? 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years? And the answer to that question is how successful you are as a leader. And I was like, not very successful back then. And so now, I can take a whole month off, but learning to deal with those processes had a big impact. And everybody's got their own version of like which segments of business are most important. There's a lot of these P's, but for me, the 4 P's that I always focus on are the first 2 you just said, people and process. And obviously you have to have the right product. It has to be well defined and well marketed.
Absolutely.
You have to write the right promotion. You got to be able to get attention and acquire customers. I'm going to steal a little bit of knowledge from you with some specific questions that I have, because why not? I've got you on the show. On the people side, here's an internal debate that I haven't really been able to answer reading back through Traction, but I could just be skipping over it. So we use the people analyzer. People don't know what that is. Just to describe it a little bit more from what you just said, we basically have all of our core values. Those are different for everybody. We've got 6 of them. They're drawn up on the wall behind me. We define those in our kind of DE way document. It kind of talks about what do each of those mean and what do they look like on a day-to-day basis. Like it's one thing to put joy on the wall that side, but what does it actually look like on a day-to-day basis? Sure. And then we rate people, and then Traction has like a plus, minus, or a minus. And the goal for us is the bar out of 6 core values is that 4 of them are a plus and 2 of them are a plus minus or better, and none of them are a minus. And if they're minus, that's something we got to work on. But here's the question I have. The leadership team always evaluates the team on those core values. And then also on the 3 things you mentioned, do they get it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity for it? But do you ever do this, or is it supposed to be done Traction-wise? Is there rules around this? Does the team review themselves as it relates to core values? Do they review the leadership team? Does leadership team are they the only ones who have an opinion on this? What's the thought on how you've seen that used in organizations?
So EOS doesn't specifically define some of this, but let me lean on some of my experience here. So one thing that we do talk about is having the team members rate themselves. So we recommend a quarterly conversation, and it's not a quarterly performance review where you're sitting down with some big document. It's not that type of thing. It's a much more casual conversation, if you will. We do want you to bring you typically 1 piece of paper, and it's got your core values on it. And we want you to rate yourself. How are you doing? How do you think you did? And a lot of times the team member will actually rate themselves in line with what you think. If you think they're plus minus on something, they probably think so too, if they're being open and honest with themselves at least. So it's up to you to get them to feel safe having those conversations. But yeah, so if you want to do some 360 stuff, I'm not a big 360 fan. I don't like anonymous stuff typically, because the struggle for me is if somebody gives me some feedback, I'm all about fixing things, right? I'm a fixer. Yeah. And if I don't fully understand the feedback I've received, it's harder for me because I need to ask questions to understand it sometimes. So every once in a while, an anonymous survey, a 360 feedback like that, it makes sense to give you some visibility to some blind spots you might have. But just keep that kind of in context, because it's going to frustrate the heck out of you probably when you get that feedback.
Yeah, that's been basically the problem, is that we. I'll tell everybody exactly where I ranked them, and I want them to rank me too. But we have the team kind of rate each other biannually on these things, but they are anonymous. And I think the thing about anonymous is you get a more raw response from somebody because they're not worried about the consequences. The problem is it's hard for that person to know how to fix that. And somebody leaves a little comment attached to it, but it's not that helpful. So we've been kind of struggling. I like what you're saying of just make it a conversation on a quarterly basis of, hey, we know what these values are. Where do you see yourself? Because maybe that, and we've kind of started to lean towards that. So I think that's something we need to adjust internally and I think that's the value to kind of, for everybody else that's listening, this is the value of an implementer. I'm kind of stealing Chris's time because he's on my show, but that's the value of an implementer is some of these things are not Traction. The book Traction does a great job of outlining the vast majority of it, but in some of these nuances, it's well, hold on. but we have the people analyzer. I know the leadership team needs to use that to evaluate the team, but does the team use it to evaluate the leadership team? Does the team use it to evaluate their peers? What does that look like? And that's where an implementer might be able to provide more clarity based on your context. Because I also think this may be different based on size of the company, culture at the company, all kind of stuff probably affects that, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has to do with the level of the person you're talking to as well. They're going to have different insights. And it's up to us as leaders, as managers, to make sure we're providing what we call LMA, which is leadership, management, and accountability. It's an equation. Leadership plus management equals accountability. Everybody comes into, I want accountability, right? Well, great, we all do. But you can't have accountability until you've done your part, right? One of the biggest frustrations I see when I talk to people is this person, I can't hold this, or this person is not being accountable. I'm like, well, why aren't you holding them accountable? And generally it comes down to they haven't set the proper context. They haven't provided the time, the resources, the tools, the training, all of the stuff that the person needs to be able to do the job. They haven't provided that yet. And you can't hold somebody accountable until you've checked those boxes and said, okay, I've done everything I can possibly do for this person, including coaching, being open and honest with them where they're at, and getting them to go. Getting back to your question about does the team member also rate the leader? Yes, that is part of that quarterly conversation. We want them to rate them not only on core values, but we have the LMA checklist. And LMA checklist goes both ways. It's a list of 2 pages of items that they're supposed to provide as a leader to your direct report. And we check those off as a leader, making sure we're doing that. And we also ask our team member, our direct report, to rate us on how are we doing. Are we providing proper time and attention? Are we providing all the tools and resources? All of that stuff so that you can succeed at your job. That's a really telling conversation that generally opens up some eyes and can really create the path forward in some of those instances.
Well, we're not doing that, so clearly we're doing some things wrong, and it's a good reminder of why you need an implementer. Here's what we did. We hired an implementer at the beginning. They helped us get things moving. It felt like we were on a pretty good trajectory, felt like we had it kind of figured out, and I'm arrogant enough to think that I can just keep figuring it out. But it's so great to have these kind of conversations because I kind of go, we're not looking at the LMA checklist. I don't even remember seeing that in there. It's in there somewhere, but we're not using that. So like, that's a problem, And I think for people listening, the reason I say that, and I'm that transparent about like, okay, there's something I'm not doing right here, is I think it's easier for people to hear a conversation like this and start to become overwhelmed already. And I think that's the unfairness of this conversation to some extent, is that there's a bias because I already know traction at least relatively well. And I have a curse of knowledge going into this talk. And I think some people may be listening to it going, well, I don't even know what they're talking about. Like there's too much going on. So let's bring it, as we kind of land the ship here, let's bring it way back down. What's the first thing that somebody needs to do if they go, you know what, I am struggling with, chaos in my business. I am struggling with spending too much time, being worn out, stressed out, and ready to quit. What's the first step that you think that they should take to move forward despite everything else we've talked about today?
Really, what I believe is first thing you should do is you should read the book Traction. Okay, that is going to lay the foundation for your path forward. Now, whether you choose to use an implementer or not is completely up to you, your personal situation, your business situation, and all that stuff. But what we bring to the table is that accountability, the experience, the coaching. Our job as implementers is not to entrench ourselves in your organization. Our job is to be the leader, the leadership team coach, the teacher, right, and a facilitator. We want to instill that knowledge and build the context for the leadership team so that typical engagement's about 2 years, and then we're out of the way, and the team is running their own EOS process at that point. What we do find is a lot of our clients will have us back regularly, maybe run an annual once a year, or come run a quarterly this quarter just to keep us honest and like you said, to kind of do that litmus test of are we checking those boxes. That's really what it comes down to. But read the book Traction. We teach starting with the foundation, right? The accountability chart. That's where almost all your evil is in your accountability chart. So what we teach is fire everybody on paper. Okay. Build your structure, right? It's funny when I first say that, everyone's like, "Whoa, wait!"
Everyone's like, "Whoa, hold on!" Yeah, not legitimately on paper. This is an intellectual exercise.
Some people are like, "I get to fire everybody?" Yeah. So it can go one of either way. But fire everybody on paper and build the structure for the organization and what you're looking for in the next 6 to 12 to 18 months. Right? We're going to grow on this path. What do we need from a structure standpoint so that we can get to where we need to be? Then, no titles being egos. We put the role. What's the responsibility in there? We put the 5 roles they're responsible for, the 5 major accountabilities. And we start building out your organizational chart on steroids, which we call the accountability chart. Build that out and then start putting people back in seats. You might find you're in 2 seats. You might find, there's all kinds of stuff going on. We just want to make sure there's no seats that have 2 people in them, because when everyone's accountable, nobody is. So we want to make sure we have a single person in each seat so we can look at who's responsible for that stuff. Once you've done that, now you've got a foundation where you can look around and see who's responsible, who's accountable for everything, and then you can start to build out the rest of the steps in EOS.
Absolutely. I could talk about this stuff all day, but I just realized we're going way over time, but that's okay, because this has been really valuable. I know for me personally, and I hope that if it's been valuable for me, I think it'll be valuable for other people as well. Chris, if people want to find more out about you, where is the best place for them to go to learn about you and what you do?
Sure. You can check out the website, which is thetractionhub.com. You can email me at chris@thetractionhub.com.
All right. Chris, thanks so much for being on Building a Business That Lasts today. I think it's been a really helpful time for everybody. And I think we're going to have a lot of people out there reading Traction after this. So thanks for your time today.
Jay, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. If you can't tell, I'm really passionate about it. I just truly, truly enjoy helping other entrepreneurs get more what they want in their business. So thanks for having me.
Same, brother. Me too. It's my talk time has been way too high today. In my early episodes, my wife always said, "Hey, you talk too much." I'm like, "I know." So I work really hard at that, but I'm so passionate about this. I couldn't help myself, so I apologize again. But thanks for being on the show. It's been great to have you here. Have a great rest of the week.
You too. Thanks, Jay.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.